afternoon. Welcome back to Harris Hall, the Tuesday, July 11th, 2023 regular meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. And Mr. Mokrycki, the first thing I'm going to say is we discussed this at lunchtime, and we're going to charge Director Gray rent for the seat that she's been occupying all day.
I'm not sitting at the table. I'm back here.
I'll pay her to be there.
Yeah. We are paying her to be.
Yep.
Very
All of us.
capable and brilliant team up here.
Yes.
So we're here to applaud.
We are
No
we're all
argument.
here to do the public's work.
Mr. Mokrycki, much as I'd like to as 12A is a discussion status update on progress with unhoused housing population, unhoused population initiative, excuse me, and as much as I would love to introduce the panel, I'm going to ask you to introduce your panel today.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Good afternoon. About 2 years ago, the board asked for us to provide regular updates to you on the work happening, a standing agenda item. And so you're familiar with Ms. Budd and her team being in front of you and providing these updates, and they've really been great. So this is really to update on the progress, partnerships, solutions related to Lane County shelter and housing work. A lot of things happening. And I'll turn it over to Kate, our interim Human Services Division Manager, to take it from here.
Thank you. And so I have the pleasure of introducing today Maria Cortez, who is a program service coordinator with our team focusing on emergency shelter. I want to give shout out to Maria, who is a recent graduate of the Lane County Leadership Cohort, and not only used her time to be a part of that group for over 6 weeks, 1 day a month, but on top of her usual workload. So really appreciate her dedication and interest in continuing her leadership in Lane County. And then also have the opportunity to introduce Carly Walker, who is our HMIS supervisor. Carly's been in her role for a little less than a year at this point and already has made significant strides in being able to share information with the public in a way that is more consumable and able to be more access to the general public. So I look forward to what they have to share today.
Thank you all, and I'm going to just get my screen sharing going. All right, so as Kate mentioned, my name is Maria Cortez. I'm a program services coordinator for Lane County Human Services Division, and I am going to talk with you all a little bit about some of the severe weather efforts that have been happening in Lane County. And just to give you a brief overview, we'll talk a little bit about the last winter that we just experienced in 2022-2023. We'll dive into what efforts are happening right now for the summer weather, and then look forward to this next winter and how we are beginning to plan. So our winter response happened in multiple ways. The warming centers are a critical part of this response across the county. So both locally here in Eugene Springfield with the Egan Warming Centers, and then multiple jurisdictions also operate warming centers. We had a bit of collaboration with our warming center providers this year, which was sort of a new effort, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, and also touch on the Severe Weather Collaborative, which is a new initiative, a new group that has come together to discuss winter resources, severe cold weather resources, and also the Severe Cold Weather Survival Stockpile, which is also a new initiative that we carried out this last winter and proved to be quite successful, and I will tell you a little bit more about that. So the Egan Warming Centers, again, are a critical part of our response here in Lane County. They activate at below 30 degrees, and the reason for that threshold, I've had kind of a lot of questions, why not 32 degrees as opposed to 30 degrees? And that really has to do with, as you move up to 31 and 32 degrees, by each degree, that increases the number of nights that you have to activate. And because Egan, like all of our warming centers in Lane County, is volunteer operated for the most part. That really can put a big strain on volunteers to come back night after night. It's quite a big effort. This last winter was quite a challenge for Egan. There were 31 activations, and this was, a record breaker for Egan. They served over 1,400 individuals, and there were up to 500 beds open per night. And we say up to because that really depends on a couple of different factors: the number of volunteers who sign up each night, and the number of site hosts who open their doors for Egan. And so if we don't have enough volunteers, we can't open all of the doors that we might be able to. And so, for example, this last winter, there was a night where we just didn't have enough volunteers and we weren't able to open the youth site, which is obviously heartbreaking. And so that just kind of gives you an idea on how essential it is to have volunteers. During this winter, we were able to coordinate with Oregon Department of Human Services. Their emergency management program was able to send over a number of staff from ODHS to kind of fill in some of the gaps for volunteer shifts, especially on these longer stretches, right? When we have, 1 or 2 nights of activation, it's not quite as much of a strain as if we were having to activate for 6 nights in a row, say so. This chart represents the total number of unique individuals served over the past 4 years. And so as you can see, we have, this last winter, exceeded our pre-pandemic numbers. There's also a large dip there, which was the pandemic and how it affected Egan. And so really it was just a big loss of volunteers and a big loss of those sites that, again, would open their doors. And so I show you this because even though our numbers have increased, our volunteers and our sites are still, not all of them have come back, and so that's still something that Egan is struggling with. This chart represents the total number of activations over the past 4 years, and as you can see, last winter we more than doubled the number of activations as opposed to the each of the prior 3 years. And I want to point this out because it really gives you an idea of how unpredictable the weather is. And so, we know it's going to be cold. We know we're going to have situations where we're going to have to activate, but we don't necessarily know what that's going to look like. And so it makes it more challenging to plan and prepare, and it makes it more challenging to plan for funding. So some of the strengths of the Egan Warming Centers are obviously they have a dedicated volunteer base, and there are many volunteers who come back year after year and night after night to serve. There are also some dedicated sites that are, year after year showing up, even through the pandemic, still opening their doors, and some of which are going to continue into this next winter or anticipated to continue into this next winter. And then strong leadership with Tim Black as the coordinator of the program, and year after year, his efforts during emergency situations to coordinate resources. So some opportunities are that there are needs around having site hosts for downtown Eugene area and Springfield. Currently, we don't have any sites that are identified for those 2 locations. And so I want to make that known that is an opportunity for our community to get involved and step up to help out with Egan. Also, always a need for more volunteers. Like I mentioned, it takes a lot of volunteers to operate the site. And funding for overnight staff. Ideally, it would be great to be able to fill in gaps when we don't have enough volunteers, and it's possible we aren't able to open a site, to be able to have some paid positions for folks to plan for. So rural warming centers are also an essential component here in our county, and Cottage Grove operated the Beds for Freezing Nights, as well as Fern Ridge Community Services in Veneta. They operate out of a local church. The Florence Emergency Cold Weather Shelter, which is pictured here, runs a warming center out of pallet shelters. And then the Oak Ridge Warming Center, they run a warming center out of a community building. So warming center collaboration happened this year. We were able to have kind of a convening of and a connection meeting for all of the leaders in all of the warming shelters across the county. And as I believe that was kind of the first time we did something like that. And so it was a great opportunity for folks to collaborate, to learn from each other. Some communities are doing some things really, really well. And so it's an opportunity to, see how the community comes together and becomes involved in these efforts. The Cold Weather Survival Supply Stockpile is also a new initiative that we unfolded this last winter. And this was really, the idea behind the stockpile was to, first, to understand that there are not enough resources, there's not enough funding to go around. So the idea with the stockpile is to present a way that the community can sort of have a platform to contribute and to donate and to get involved. And so First Christian Church stepped up. They have a great site to be able to host a stockpile. They also have the infrastructure in place through their Helping Hearts program. They have a volunteer base. They have sort of operations already in place. So having a stockpile, it sort of worked for them. And so that was a partnership between Lane County, First Christian, and Cahoots. And we were able to get the media involved and really get the word out about the stockpile. And it proved to be successful. There were over 1,600 supplies donated, and these supplies were then given out to providers who came on site to access the stockpile. And those providers took those back out. A lot of them are outreach providers who are working directly with unhoused and unsheltered individuals. But there, if you look at the list, there's some organizations here that I would never have thought would have access to the stockpile. And so it's really interesting to see that there are many organizations interfacing with the unsheltered and unhoused population. The Severe Weather Collaborative is another initiative. This group formed last winter, really, again, addressing kind of recognizing that there is not necessarily funding to go around, but what can we do to look at existing resources and how can we best mobilize the resources that we do have and really maximize those. And so that's the idea with the collaborative. In the winter we put together a resource list. There were multiple providers at the table. So lots of folks have different things to contribute. So hot weather. So now we are in hot weather season, and some of the strategies that we're utilizing are really looking at what we did with the winter and mimicking some of those things. And I think some of these things are kind of rolling out for the first time and kind of trial and error and figuring out what makes sense. But with the Severe Weather Collaborative, we've started meeting. We met last month in June, and we're going to be meeting on Thursday. And this, what we've talked about so far is we're really hearing, just ideas and really just kind of getting a better sense of what is the need around hot weather. I think we're all pretty familiar with what happens with cold weather and what the needs are. But I think there's been less mobilization historically around hot weather. And so we're really just kind of exploring what that need is and seeing what makes the most sense. We're looking to improve communication with 211. So 211 came out and talked at the Severe Weather Collaborative last month and gave kind of an overview to providers about what services they offer and how we can better utilize 211 in our community. And 211 is a great resource for getting out like cooling center information, that sort of thing. We are also, for the first time, trying out this hot weather survival stockpile, and First Christian Church has stepped up again to host this. And so we are currently seeking donations. I've had questions like, it makes sense that we would ask for cold weather donations, but what would hot weather donations look like? And there's actually a lot of items that could be contributed. So obviously the first one is water, bottled water, or reusable containers, lightweight clothing, really anything that can help people cool down and shade themselves. So if there is interest, I know there are people watching too. Lane County webpage has information about the stockpile, what items could be contributed, and how to donate there. And then looking at cooling center information and how to better distribute that information via media, via social media, via the Lane County webpage, and then just getting that information out to providers who then can get it to their networks as well. So looking forward at how we are planning for winter, again, we are gonna try this stockpile again. And First Christian is already talking about, they're very excited about doing this again. They felt really good about the turnout and the ability to connect with providers in the community. And so we are already having those conversations, as well as planning for the Warming Center Connection meeting that we had back in January, looking to have that earlier in the fall so that we are kind of prepared to go into that season where we will be needing access to warming centers. And the same with the Severe Weather Collaborative. So looking to begin having those meetings and those conversations earlier on, as opposed to when we have our first kind of emergency. And so just want to kind of finish with some asks and making it just really clear that the Egan Warming Centers are in need of a site in downtown Eugene as well as Springfield. We don't have identified sites, so if there are folks who are listening, businesses, churches, organizations who would be willing, Egan, they have their own process. They clean up in the morning. It's not as much of a burden as some folks might think, and so there's a clear process for that. Also, Egan Warming Center volunteers are always needed. All of that information and ways to connect with Egan, you can see on the Egan Warming Center website, online, through St. Vincent de Paul. And then the severe weather stockpile supplies are always needed. So currently we're needing those hot weather supplies. Again, you can find that information on the Lane County webpage. And then we will be, as we're moving toward cold weather, we'll definitely be needing to stock up for winter. And then summer cooling locations countywide is something that we are also wanting to be able to add to our list. So any organizations, groups who would be willing, businesses who would be willing to open their doors for a couple of hours to small groups of people, please let us know. We will put you down on our list to share with the community so that folks can come in and get out of the sun for a bit. And with that, I will just leave it open for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Cortez. And would you like questions on your presentation, or shall we wait till the end?
I think it's fine if you'd like to.
Excellent, excellent. I think a number of questions have incubated, so Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. Clearly, since we're talking about Egan, I have to do my regular, which is I have to declare a potential conflict of interest. But there's no actual decision that's being made by the board today. So I'll continue with part of the conversation. To round that out, it's because I'm related to the executive director of St. Vincent de Paul. The main question is, clearly we have an entity like Egan doing cold sites, but do we have an entity doing doing something for hot weather, because I don't think it's the same entity. Like Egan specializes in cold weather. So who is the responsible entity for the hot weather situations?
And so just in short, we don't have an agency like St. Vincent de Paul who is able to take the lead with the cool weather. It's simply that we need funding in order to be able to do that. And so when thinking about the responsibility, depending on the scenario, often the housing team will work closely with public health in order to kind of move forward with what's needed, as well as with emergency management and Director Winningham.
As a follow-up to that question, it seems like we need something cohesive and as it occurs more often, which it's eventually going to occur more often. Are we able to gather the same kind of data that we collect for Egan as when we do hot weather events? Because I think that's going to be really important going forward. They'll be different. And eventually we'll, as you are already embarking on this, we'll need to fine tune it over time. And that data will be really important.
So we don't, and primarily in that, at this point, we haven't provided any overnight accommodations during the hot weather. Not to say that we wouldn't, especially if it's coupled with fire and unhealthy air. But when we seek to collect data, it really is that overnight supports. I appreciate your point, and particularly if there were dollars identified, then we could work to be able to collect data in some of the different cooling options that exist.
Great. It's clearly in its infancy, but I just am trying to play it out into the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Any further comments? Vice Chair Trieger?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it. And congratulations on the Emerging Leaders Program graduation. When we had the heat dome, was that summer before last? Losing track, 21, right? This issue of these cooling centers seems to me anyway even more daunting than the warming shelters, because it isn't just unhoused people. There are people who are vulnerable and housed in a heat dome, people living in a trailer in an open, mobile homes without cooling, in an open blacktop lot. People don't want to leave their pets inside to go. I mean, all those, and it's so many more people. So it's daunting, but I think as we talked about when there was the heat dome, we did the cooling center with Red Cross at Lane Event Center, and we were able to work with Green Hill and shelter animals in the livestock building. But people had to walk across that. They came to the cooling center, they walked all the way there, so they were practically in heat stroke by the time they arrived, and then they had to walk their animal all the way across the blacktop and then walk back to the cooling center. The immediacy of the impact of temperatures like that is much greater than the immediacy of the impact of cold weather. So it feels really daunting. So thanks for taking it on, and hope we can figure something out sooner rather than later. You mentioned something about site rotation, and my concern is how do people know where to go if the sites are different from activation to activation? How does the word get out about where centers are open in any given event is one question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So those conversations are just sort of beginning to happen with St. Vincent de Paul staff and with Tim Black and his team. And really the idea was birthed out of the old model for what is now the annex, which is the family shelter, which used to travel from sort of church basement to church basement on a weekly basis. So that was where that idea came from. I don't know if we've come to a place that we are ready to move forward with that model. But those conversations are happening just in terms of taking the strain off of the particular sites that sign up for a whole season. And it could be that the rotation happens on, rather than a weekly basis, perhaps, for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then it would be really thinking through how would that information get out to, and then would it be multiple sites? So there's still some planning that needs to happen. There are strategies that, I mentioned the rural communities, have some really good ideas around, like Bonita, for example. They put out stakes. There's community members who put lawn stakes, letting folks know if there's an activation night for their warming centers. In Florence, they have a tight community, and there's particular grocery stores that folks can go to and know that they'll be able to find out if there's an activation that night. They'll have something posted, and they'll also be able to wait for a shuttle there. So there are, some strategies, and I think that where that, warming center connection, those meetings can be beneficial just to learn from how other communities are doing things effectively.
Great, thank you. Just two other quick things. One is there any kind of gaps analysis or tracking of when activations don't happen but could if that threshold were 32 instead of 30, and or a hypothermia threshold? Because of course you can have warmer temperatures, but if it's wet, if stuff is wet and cold, there's risk there. So is there any, just to get a sense of what the true need is, instead of the tail sort of wagging the dog around activations being dictated by volunteer capacity?
Good question. I don't think we have an agreed upon threshold, or, we're still in conversation, actually just this week in conversation with public health around setting some standards for around the hot weather. And so I think having some more clarity around the cold weather as well is something that we will be working on and committed to be working on, especially as we are continuing to engage with the Severe Weather Collaborative and strategize with the community around. It makes it easier for, I think, providers and the community and everyone to rally around a particular threshold, whether it be with heat or with cold weather. And so those things, I think, are still kind of being determined.
Great,
And,
thank you.
and regarding the gap that you're mentioning, this was brought up early into this year, and so I understand that there is tracking happening as of January, and will continue, because your points are well taken, especially if there are additional opportunities to open up, to be able to look at, should it be, where the hypothermia threshold is, should we look at 31 or 32, and it'd be helpful to have that data.
Great, thank you. And then finally, on the solution side, and this is sort of a bridge between the panel and our county administrator, because you mentioned earlier you're meeting with Jameson Otten soon, the LTD general manager. When I was in DC with him, we were having some conversations about community need and serving the unhoused, and he had mentioned this concept of warming buses, that LTD has a resource, which is a safe, comfortable place to sit. It's not suitable for service of meals and sleeping, but they have a resource, and he was just sort of thinking out loud about potentially being a partner. So might be a partner to bring into your conversations, something for you to talk about in your meeting with him tomorrow. I don't think you need a formal assignment request for that, but please let him know I mentioned that conversation that we had in DC and his offer of that as a potential support. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Further discussions, comments? Then we'll go on with the presentation, but I'm going to take an opportunity to say who Tom Egan was. We talk about Tom Egan warming centers, and most people don't know that Tom Egan was an Army officer, served in the 2nd Battalion of the 162nd Infantry right here in Eugene, served at the Armory that it used to be where DD Services is now. And that's where I first met Tom. And, Tom was a brilliant individual. He's a great officer. I knew him when he was a first lieutenant, and he really was an inspirational person in his life. And, it really touches my heart to see how inspirational his death has been since it was, 15 years ago now that Tom perished. And, it's really, this is not the way he would have wished to be remembered, but I know that, that his memory is really helping us to inspire people to take that extra step, to go beyond what they might normally do. And, you know, the volunteers at Egan Warming Centers, I went through the volunteer training at I think it's St. Thomas's, the Episcopal Church on Hilliard. And there used to be dozens and dozens of people that would go through that training and get inspiration and really provide the cadre that I think is probably still around today. So I don't know if that training still occurs, Maria. Do you know if we're still having that regular training?
Yes, so there's a couple of different training options. You can do it online, and you can also attend in person, and they are regular trainings. The information is posted on the Egan Warming Center website.
Excellent. Well, let's say it really is, back then it was about 3 sessions worth of training, and people were really, I thought I knew quite a bit about the types of things they were doing, and it really gave me insights as to how to maximize I never did volunteer. I just put that asterisk and caveat. I did not actually volunteer. Time didn't permit me to do that for one reason or another, but the people who were there did, and really found ways to use their personal skills, not learning new things necessarily from within their own heart, but using their personal skills to really make a difference. So congratulations and good work on that. You've really shone the light on some of the things that we've been doing for a while that we really are stepping up the effort on. I'm looking right now at the summer heat wave stockpile needs your help. And I was going to ask you, how can people make a donation to the stockpile? It says right online, but can you tell us how to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. So First Christian Church accepts donations between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and so you can go in person and donate. They also have an Amazon wish list, so you can purchase items online and just have them sent to the church.
Excellent. And they'll give you the address there. And the list includes goo-filled bandanas and dried fruit trail mix, things that, you know, are really easy to obtain and donate in relatively large quantities, you know, full cases of. So Director Gary, you stepped to the table.
Yes, one more update that I just wanted to give to you, particularly on the hot weather topic and particularly related to individuals who are impacted negatively and are housed. So on January 1st of 2024, a new Medicaid benefit will go into effect through the Medicaid 1115 waiver that is a climate-related benefit. So individuals, like I say, particularly those who are housed, who are at risk due to climate emergencies, will have access to things like air conditioners, air purifiers that are purchased by the CCOs, of course, if they are Medicaid beneficiaries, which is a large percentage of the population who's at risk in these types of events. We are gaining some more information about how that benefit will be accessed because the Medicaid 1115 waiver application says there needs to be a declared emergency. I'm trying to find out, can that be a local declaration? Does it need to be a state declaration? Because, of course, when we evacuated Oak Ridge in the Cedar Creek fire, there was no declared emergency. And there had been horrific smoke conditions in Oak Ridge for weeks at the point that that happened. So I do think we need to consider looking a little differently, and I think it would make a lot of sense for me to come back in coordination with Kate closer to when the rules, after the rules have been fully determined for this new benefit, so that we can understand if there's anything we need to do locally on the emergency disaster declaration or when we trigger the declaration of disasters or make that request of the governor in order to give greater access to this benefit for residents within Lane County. So, you know, a different model, a lot less centralized than things like cooling shelters, but still potentially highly beneficial.
Thank you, Director Gray. Well, we'll hear more about that. Thank you. Kate, back to you.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and pass the computer to Carly if we can, or switch seats. So each year we have a number of reports that we submit to HUD on the federal level in order to meet our requirements as the collaborative applicant for the continuum of care. And so Carly's going to share with you some of the information that we gleaned from those reports.
Yeah, I gave a short, not finalized update when I came to the meeting in April, but now I have finalized numbers. This is for sure what was submitted and a lot more detail there. I also am not going to talk too much about our housing inventory because we have published a new dashboard that makes it very easy for the whole public to see what our inventory is any day of the year. So while January 25th is like a date that I could talk about, I can show you much more. So I think it's much more relevant. There are two reports that I am responsible for submitting in January. They happen at the same time and they're for the same date. So the first is the point in time count, which is about the number of individuals who are experiencing homelessness on a given night. So how many of them were in the community that we can find, and how many were sheltered, and how many of those were unsheltered. So we collect some demographic information about those individuals. Something we've been doing for the past couple of years is pulling this from HMIS first. And that's something Commissioner Farr was talking to me about before this meeting started. A traditional pit count, and the way most folks do it, is that they send volunteers out into the community. You have to find people. You have to ask them if they're willing to participate in a survey, and you have to get them, to fill out the survey. So that's really challenging, and it leads to very severe undercounts. It's something that other communities, for them, it may make sense to do. But in our community, HMIS, our homeless management information system, is not just the shelter projects and the rapid rehousing projects and the transitional housing projects. We have food pantries, we have service centers and Florence and all sorts of places. We have day access centers. We have projects who participate just because they want to. And so individuals who receive any of those services and say, yes, I am homeless, can be included in the count when we do it this way. We don't have to survey them. I can just pull a report. So that's what we did this year, supplemented by a street outreach count. And also, domestic violence providers cannot participate in HMIS, so we are able to get de-identified information from them in a different method. So I'll talk quite a bit more about that. The same night, it's always the last Wednesday in January, we also do the housing inventory count. So how many beds were available from all of these project types? Shelter, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and also how many of those beds were full on that night. So this is just one point in time. I do have some information both on housing type, funding sources. We also got the same information from domestic violence shelters and other programs that were available, like the Fortify shelter, while it was still open. So we were able to get a quite comprehensive look. The really important caveat I have is that, one, this is just one night in time. So we publish a monthly estimate of who's experiencing homelessness every month based on HMIS. The pit count is just one night, so it's far less than the January monthly count was, for example. The housing inventory we publish, that I'll show you later, includes all of our project types. I cannot include that information when I submit it to HUD. HUD is only interested in certain pieces of information. There's pros and cons to that. One of the pros is it's a smaller report. And also, we are able to be compared to other communities. So they publish data. I've linked in these slides, but I know they won't publish it until probably October for this January. We can compare our pit count numbers and our housing inventory numbers to other communities exactly according to the same parameters and guidelines. So how many people were experiencing homelessness in our community compared to Jackson County, compared to Portland, compared to all those areas, it's very easy to compare that information. So pros and cons, but it is what we have. This year on January 25th, we were able to identify 2,824 people that we knew for sure were experiencing homelessness on this night. 640 were in shelter, 74 were in transitional housing, and over 2,100 were unsheltered. If I pulled the by name list count for this month, it was about 4,200. So certainly we didn't grab everyone who was homeless in this month, but this this is our best estimate of who was homeless on that night. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the survey because I know there are questions sometimes about, is HMIS a good enough count? And also, are we finding people in surveys as well? So this year, we sent street outreach workers who had been trained and, who are professionals at doing this to areas where we thought we might have people who weren't participating in HMIS and then we wouldn't count otherwise. We found about 250 people. 35 of them said no thanks, which, of course, folks are welcome to do. I have no idea whether we counted them in our HMIS count or not. 61 of them we already had, so that's great. And then 163 people we had not been able to identify otherwise, so they got to be included. That's less than 8% of our count. So to me, that means HMIS is a pretty good estimate, other than the rural areas, where in some of those rural areas, it almost, I think in Florence, it doubled the count of how many people were experiencing homelessness in Florence. We just don't have as many service providers, and also the population is different. So really important to continue doing these surveys in rural areas, making sure we get a better count than we could otherwise. But 43% of the surveys we got to count were in rural areas. So that's really where we're sort of lacking in our system representation. This year compared to last year, our numbers were exactly the same, basically. One large difference that's not noted in the numbers, but I have linked below, is that even though Egan was open for 31 nights this winter, it was not open the night of the pit count, and it was open last year. So the 697 folks you see in shelter in 2022, I'm really bad at mental math, about a quarter of those folks were from Egan. So we actually have added a lot of permanent shelter beds, and we don't really get credit for that when you look at these pie charts. Our numbers are fairly similar, but also when you think about how many people did we definitely see the night of January 26th in 2022, well, that was a much colder night, and probably more folks were seeking services, not just Egan, but also other things they may have needed, versus this year. Again, it's just an estimate. Like, we're doing our best to try to get that, but fairly similar across years. So I don't see the dip as necessarily a big success. I did want to share a little bit of housing inventory information. 2022 versus 2023, what was the difference in the number of beds that we had? And we increased in all of these areas. I showed this at the April meeting. A great question I had gotten from that meeting was about rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing is a little tricky because household sizes fluctuate depending on who we're able to serve. So I've also included the number of households we were able to serve, which also increased. So we're improving our housing stock where we can and our shelter beds that are available. I just have one more piece I want to touch on from the pit count itself, which are some special populations. Because our 2022 and 23 numbers were so similar, I didn't put percentages across years. They're quite similar. But our percentage of folks in the pit count who were veterans went down. Same thing for our percentage of people who were chronically homeless. Our percentage of youth and domestic violence survivors went up. And for domestic violence survivors, it went up a lot. One new item we have this year, and so I'm really excited to see the national numbers come out, is that this is the first year HUD has told continuums of care to collect age. Before now, we collected, are you under 18? Or are you 18 to 24, so you're a youth? Or are you 25 and up? And so we really did not have any information about seniors experiencing homelessness. This year, we'll be able to see that for our community and for others to be able to compare. 28% of our count was over the age of 55.
Ms. Walker, we have a question from the Vice Chair.
Just a clarifying question, thank you. The age 55 plus, I assume, is duplicative of veterans, DV survivors, chronic homeless.
Yes.
Thank you.
So 28% were age 55 and older. That 800 round number just was convenient. It happened to add to that. About a third of those folks are age 65 and older. To me, that seems high, but I've also never seen those numbers from another community before. So really excited to see the national numbers come out so we can see how that compares. I know that's something I get asked about a lot, and I've always had to say, I don't know. The last thing I want to show is the inventory, but if there are questions about the pit, I'm happy to answer those first.
If I may just ask a quick question. A couple of years ago, there was a report that the fastest growing demographic of homeless people was women over 65. Is that holding consistent, or do we have a way of knowing that?
That's something I can look into. Quite frankly, many of the demographics are growing. So which is the fastest, that's a tricky number to look at. We are working on a new version of the homelessness by name list where I think that will be easier for even the public to track. But we don't quite have the filters fine-tuned yet in a way where we could see that quite yet. But we can look back and we'd be able to look into that.
And, one thing I'm interested in exploring, not at this point in time, is we're finding new ways for people new reasons for people to be homeless all the time. So it's a dynamic population. And so by tracking who it is and where, what their last address was, for instance, is really helpful. I know you're doing all of that, so thank you very much.
I'm definitely not ready for an update on that item yet, but the beginning of July, we added a new question to all of our assessments in HMIS, knowing that a lot of data collection starts on July 1st. And we asked people, where were you living when you lost your housing? I don't trust the numbers that I have yet because it's only been 2 weeks. I can definitely bring an update back when it's been 6 months or so, and we've had a chance to look at more program intakes. So far, a lot of Eugene service providers have been able to post information, but for example, like the Oak Ridge Food Pantry is taking a little bit longer to catch up. And so we'll have to come back and I'll have some good information for you.
And like any statistical information, the longer you accurately collect it, the more accurate the information becomes. And initially, you see some pretty wild fluctuations, but after a while, that curve smooths out.
Yeah, who got services in the first 2 weeks of July is probably not indicative of who we're going to serve in the winter, for example, so.
Thank you. Any further questions? Commissioner Buck?
Thank you, Chair. Just along those same lines, I've also been hearing that a lot of our elderly are falling through the cracks due to the cost of living. That's changed in the last few years quite dramatically. And so it doesn't surprise me that this is a new data statistic point that they're interested in. HUD, but also us locally, because they have very different needs, right? Each segment of our homeless population is different, and they have very different needs. But I couldn't let it go because I always wonder about this. The point-in-time count on January 25th is like the most miserable day to go out and try to count people. It may work in the southern hemisphere, but it's not really a good day in general for the northern hemisphere because it's so cold and people are, who knows where, trying to just stay alive on those really cold days. I know that's something we as a board cannot control. That is HUD. And I wish that could change, and I will continue to talk to our congressional representatives about that, but it is a problem I've always had because I knew on that day, if we can't find people, the likely number is double or triple. We just cannot contact them on those days. And so with the homeless by name count, really validating the actual numbers, I think some of this information we get from the point in time count may or may not be relevant. The homeless by name count is the most relevant data I think that we could use locally.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and especially as we get to amass more data over time on that. And you didn't mention the short daylight hours on January 25th. You get up in the morning, it's dark tonight already.
Yes, it's a statistical method nightmare, I would say, in January. Also, to me, though, this was a great opportunity on that day to test how good is our HMIS count. And to me, it's pretty close. Certainly, I think we're undercounting folks in rural areas to a degree, but also street outreach workers knew where to go. You know, we got a pretty good estimate. So to me, what that says is, well, the by name list is much better for understanding, you know, compared to just that one night. It also means that the by name list coming from HMIS means it's a pretty accurate count to start with. So, you know, we tested it out.
Thank you. Further questions? By Duque.
One more thing from
We're,
Carly.
we're still running. We'll see if this works okay. I think I'm gonna have to reshare my screen. So the other thing I wanted to share was about our inventory. We published a new dashboard on the inventory for all of our housing project types. That's inclusive of shelter. And this link is live. You can pick any month you want. I'm going to pick on June because it's a lot more recent than January. And we published this information just a couple of days ago. So I do want to make it clear that this dashboard is not what shelters have beds tonight. Instead, the first week of every month, we publish last month's inventory information. So at the top of the page, it says, if you're seeking shelter assistance, go to this link. And that's the resource for folks who are seeking shelter today. But I think very helpful to be able to see what's available any day or month of the year. Up here at the top, there's the option to look by shelter type or by agency, and then some additional information through these other purplish rectangles. You can choose your shelter type. So like I mentioned earlier, when I submit information to HUD, I can't include alternative shelter. Other is going to include some of those overflow sites, which are shelter, but you know, Egan isn't going to be on this emergency shelter every month, for example. So you can choose your shelter type, see any of these project types, and your month, or even a custom date range if you'd like to. And then I think this really speaks to how comprehensive our HMIS is. You can see the number of beds that were, units that were available, how many were occupied, what percentage were full. And then if you scroll down for each of the project types, or each of the projects, you can see exactly what the utilization was for that month. So we've grouped shelter into a few types just to help clarify some items for folks who don't work with these programs every day. These ones at the top are walk-in programs, meaning that you may be able to go that same day and get a bed that night. There is a grouping of programs that take referrals from our coordinated entry system and then triage those beds for the folks who are the most vulnerable. And then there's everything else. And the way all of these, let's see if I can zoom in just a little bit. But the way all of these programs work is that, you know, they all have their own like criteria perhaps. It's hard to see on our screen, but maybe at home it's easier to see. The ones that have teal borders are the ones that are at least county funded in part. But HMIS and these dashboards are not just what does the county fund, it's what's going on in our community. And we have extremely high shelter participation. So you're able to see really for any of these programs what's going on. If you click on the name of a program, you can scroll to the top and it will update these totals day by day. So able to see this information as well. And if you hover over a specific one, it will tell you if any of those beds are dedicated to a special population. For example, Station 7 appears to have low utilization, but if you hover over, you can see they're only available to youth. So perhaps no youth needed beds on those nights or chose not to use the beds on those nights. We have this for all of the project types. I just want to pick on one more, which is permanent supportive housing. Both the permanent supportive and the rapid rehousing projects have another group of individuals, which are the people we've enrolled in the program, are seeking housing for, but we haven't been able to house yet. They might need certain documents. They might be in the process of signing a lease. They might be in their housing navigation search. And those are the numbers that are indicated in orange. So some of these programs might look slightly underutilized, but actually they have folks on their caseload, and we just haven't been able to get them into a unit quite yet. I could spend all day here, but the link is public. You know, anyone can share. I'm happy to answer questions about this anytime. We have amazing programs. They do so many cool things. I'm fortunate to know a lot about individual ones, so happy to answer those questions anytime.
And Ms. Walker, it's remarkably easy to find.
Yes.
It took me 2 clicks, and I'm on it. And it's very interactive.
We try. Yeah, thank you.
A question from Commissioner Buck?
I am so impressed with this dashboard and heard about it in its making. This is really a game changer for our community, especially for those who are wondering, where can I let some people know that they could go? Even though this is, at the end of the month, it can give you an average over time, which will be another statistical interesting fact when you come back later. In not only that, but knowing which beds are actually being occupied and utilized with the data from the people who are actually operating those beds in real time. That's important. The public in general really wants to know, are the programs that we're spending taxpayer dollars on and funding working and being utilized? Here, we can see that, and anybody can go. It's such a lift of transparency to the public. And so we need to get the word out. How are we getting the word out that this is available? I know our providers know it because they're entering information, but how do we get the public to really know that this information is now widely available at any given point in time?
So we have shared this with a number of the committees that we work with, and also are intending with the all-in information that we're sharing with the community to have a few press releases that look at the increased inventory of the different program types that Carly mentioned, and reference this housing inventory report. And so continuing to work on getting this information out to the public. And this actually just became live, weeks ago, right? So it is newer, and we're still working on getting that information out, but we'll definitely continue to push so that our community knows that it's there and available.
Great job. It's an excellent platform, and you and your team deserve a lot of credit. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And, the fact that, for instance, Brittany Quick-Warner, who is the president of the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, is one of the co-vice chairs of our Poverty and Homelessness Board. That's a great resource for pumping out a lot of information right there with the mailing list, I'll call it, that she has. Just a single example. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for this. This dashboard's amazing, and going back to the pit, and can confirm it's a miserable, having been a volunteer out doing the point-in-time count in years past, it's challenging. So, I wonder how much longer HUD's gonna hang on to it. Do we get to supplement when we provide the information with our better data, or do we just have to submit the pit count numbers to them?
It's a very old website from approximately 2005 where there are just some boxes and they ask some questions. I will say, though, HUD has been really willing to consider, I had to get the methodology for us using HMIS approved by HUD, and they said, absolutely, go for it. As long as there's those surveys to prove that you're pretty close, they've been more than willing to let us do that. I think in other communities, they just don't have the participation that we do. So while they know it's an undercount, they don't have anything better to use. The fact that HUD lets us start with HMIS and then do the surveys in addition, sure, it's not as good as a monthly count, but that one night comparison to be able to just use our system and run a report to do 92% of the count is amazing, and they've been very willing to listen to that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I'll supplement that. This morning we had a presentation that is employee recognition for our IT services. And a part of that recognition was that other counties look to us for leadership. Well, I find the same thing to be the case with human services in Lane County, that other counties look to the way we're doing things, and in their own way try to emulate it sometimes, and sometimes they help us by pointing out the things that we could do better. So I think, sharing information through Association of Oregon Counties is a wonderful way for us all to get better. So thanks. Back to you, Kate.
All right, we'll do one more switch.
see from the homepage how easy is it to find and. Right. Because when you just put shelter, you get all these things, not it.
Is that your sound effect, Kate, or is it?
That's my parking challenge.
Sound of Kate moving mountains.
All right, well, one more presentation, and I know this will be a bit familiar for all of you. On January 10th of 2023, Governor Kotek declared an emergency due to homelessness. And with that declaration came specific outcomes for the 7 continuum of care communities across Oregon to work toward. With that request, we were asked to create a plan that would help the state understand how we would utilize dollars if they were provided. And that plan was provided back in March to the state. And as you know, we were the only community who received an approval of that plan when it was submitted for the first time. So it allowed us to be able to hit the ground running, and we've been running ever since. So with that plan, we were awarded approximately $18 million from 2 kind of focus areas. One for prevention, so rent assistance and supportive services for people who are at risk of losing their housing or maybe couch surfing or doubled up across the community. And then also another bucket of funding at about $15.5 million that would support efforts around creating new emergency shelter beds, rehousing people from living on the streets and moving them into permanent housing, as well as dedicated dollars to support the great work of our HMIS programs and trainings for the providers who were going to be involved. These dollars are to be spent by the end of the declaration, which is January 10th of 2024. And so it is a short period of time for which we are to expend these dollars. So what we did once we received that official word regarding the dollars is opened up a request for proposal. And this is the county's process, as you know, to identify agencies who are interested in providing different types of supports to community members in Lane County. And we had 4 focus areas that programs could apply for, one being that prevention assistance, the second being new emergency shelter beds or improving those alternative shelters, which are basically, you know, a great example of an alternative shelter is the Conestoga huts by community supported shelters, where they are excellent ways for people to get out of the weather, but may not have heaters inside of them. And so the state provided a strict definition of what an emergency shelter looked like. And so if there were alternative shelters that didn't meet that definition, these funds could help upgrade those shelters in order to meet those definitions. And then thirdly, there was an opportunity for street outreach to engage people who are living on the street and help move them into permanent housing or help move them into programs that will help them move into permanent housing. And then lastly, rehousing programs, which is just helping folks move into permanent housing. And we were very fortunate that community providers were interested in applying for these dollars. We had 44 applications in total, which was phenomenal. And not only did we have many applications, but applications from agencies from across Lane County, which is also, you know, fantastic. We do recognize that the number of people who are houseless is growing across the county, including our more rural areas. And so it was great to have applications from new providers that the county has not contracted with in the past. From those applications, we pulled together scoring committees who ranked each of the applications, and then we awarded funds just based on, who scored the highest until we were out of dollars for each of the different program types. We awarded 28 programs funding, and then out of all those programs, we just didn't have an applicant for 10 youth beds. And so out of all the different options that folks could apply for, we just didn't have anyone apply for the 10 youth beds. And so that then allowed us to be able to develop a provider. Looking Glass very kindly stepped forward and said, yes, we're interested in offering 10 new youth beds to the community. So as such, we've been able to meet all of the different action items of our plan that was submitted to the state through this request for proposal and the Looking Glass provider development. So at this point, we are in contract negotiations. Agencies are at various stages. Some at the point where agencies are signing, others where we're waiting for the signature here at the county. And so we're moving things as quickly as possible. And as soon as agencies have a signed contract, they can start running with the programs. And I know we've been working with them to be able to provide them with the infrastructure for all these brand new programs in the last few weeks. So just a word of appreciation to all of our providers because we know how challenging it is to just get something off the ground quickly and especially without a great increase in capacity. And we know that our programs are doing the same. And so we really appreciate them. So just to break down the allocation of all-in funds a little further, you can see the approximate amount of money that has been allocated to each of the different program types. And then we also have outcomes within each of those program types that I've identified as stretch outcomes. We're really hoping that the agencies will be able to meet those outcomes at about an 80% or higher level. And so with prevention, for example, looking to support at least 741 households based on our governor's requirement. But we've invested in supporting approximately 1,300 households. And we've kind of created this stretch outcome because we recognize that there are households that won't necessarily be able to stabilize. And so we want to give a little bit of room for the providers so that we have no challenges meeting those governor's requirements.
If I may ask a quick question.
Sure.
We're looking at 1296 there, and the governor's requirement is 741. So even with that's just an 80% success rate, we're still well above the governor's requirement. Is that
Correct.
the way I read that? Okay.
Yes. And then same thing with the emergency shelter. We're required to create 230 new beds and anticipate closer to 319. And this one actually we believe is realistic at that 319 or so. And then with rehousing, looking to rehouse approximately 600 households. We must rehouse 247 households based on the governor's outcomes. And so we feel good about these stretch outcomes and that we will be meeting those governor's executive order outcomes if all come together.
Vice Chair has a question.
Sure.
Another clarifying question. I asked this last time, but different people might be watching this meeting than watched before. The creation of 319, quote, new shelter beds could, for example, be an existing Conestoga hut that has been retrofit to meet the standards of emergency shelter. So the number of units may or may not change, but it's the sort of quality and the quality of life for the person using that shelter bed will be vastly improved.
Exactly. And in fact, it's 66 brand new shelter beds that will be created as a result of these dollars. The others will be in improving alternative shelter beds.
Great, thank you.
Great investment. Thank you.
So as you can imagine, this is going to be incredibly impactful for our community, and we're very excited. A few caveats that these funding dollars came with that I think is important to share is that, one, the programs need to be new. that they can't be investments in existing programs. And in addition, the emergency shelters need to be 24/7. And so I often get asked, can we create more severe weather shelter beds, which is a great question. But unfortunately, we're not able to make that type of investment with these dollars. And they did have to be, they weren't able to be braided together with other dollars, and they couldn't supplement other funding sources. And so it does create kind of a brand new baseline of programs for the community. So these next slides just illustrate the specific agencies that will be creating programs around the action items. So for example, if we look at 1.2, the following 6 agencies are going to be increasing rent assistance for those who are most likely to experience houselessness if they didn't get assistance. And so you've got the 6 agencies, the number of households that they're going to support, and the amount of money that each of those agencies are receiving as a result of the request for proposal.
That category, Kate, that's a tremendous impact for the dollar. For instance, the Catholic Community Services, 50 households for $75,000. So that is, the dollar per household is relatively small compared to some of the other programs that we're initiating.
It is, and our focus with these dollars is to encourage agencies to be creative and to really focus on, what is it the household needs. These dollars are much more unencumbered than usual dollars that we get from the city or the federal government. And so it does allow for agencies to, really meet clients where they are and hear, what do they see is getting in their way of being able to attain housing and be able to help support households in the way that they're, requesting, as opposed to the way that the, dollars allow.
And pardon my interruption again, but it really is flexible. I mean, sometimes it may be food assistance, for instance, and sometimes it may be, well, we just need one more bed. I mean, some very, very flexible indeed.
Yeah, thank you. And the 1.1 is a diversion program, and the focus of diversion is really, again, just finding out, what might help someone be able to stay in a housing situation for a longer period of time. And I often, especially with youth, hear from, parents that are welcoming in, one of their kiddos' friends, both 21 years old and, struggling to pay rent, that they would be welcome, but the food bill is so high. And so these dollars can help support, ongoing food assistance for a few months for the household so that they can welcome that individual in for a longer period of time and just help them stabilize. So this next slide illustrates the emergency shelter bed investments. And as you can see, it's really a diverse array of additional beds, notably medical respite beds, which help someone transition from a hospital or inpatient situation to a sheltered environment where they have a staff who are checking in on them regularly, where they can recover from whatever their challenge might be. I often see people with wounds, or serious, pneumonia, for example, where they don't need to be in a hospital, but they also shouldn't be on the street, where it's filthy and, they don't have a chance to really relax and sleep. Another notable action item is improving severe weather shelters in rural areas. And so the Florence Emergency Cold Weather Shelter Committee applied to, and in fact, utilized their severe weather shelter pallets as ongoing 24/7 emergency shelter. And so we're going from, just being open for a few nights to being able to offer shelter ongoing 24/7, which is exciting. And then lastly, the action items for rehousing and street outreach. We have a 3.5, which is housing navigation and case management targeted to rural areas. And throughout this plan, the MAC committee, or the multi-agency coordinating committee that created this plan, was really interested in recognizing that the needs of rural communities are different than the needs of the more urban and suburban areas. And so we have specific action items that target our rural communities, such as housing navigation, case management, where it's, just recognize that it's hard for households to be able to find housing options, when you're in a more rural area, and that supports would be valuable, especially that are offered locally in that community. So I also just wanted to provide a quick update regarding a few of the legislative investments that were made during this last session that are applicable to all in. As I mentioned, the dollars that we were allocated, they end on January 10th of 2024. And so the clock is ticking down less than 6 months at this point. And yet we continue to hear from the governor and other legislators that they wanted to see these dollars continue. And so we did see just that come out of the legislative session, where lawmakers made pretty significant investments regarding the all-in dollars. And this chart, it shows early session, which is basically the all-in investment that started January 10th. And that's the first column here. And then the second column were investments that was made toward the end of the legislative session that basically increases the dollars beyond January 10th. And so we now have all-in funds that are available through the end of the biennium, or basically for an additional 18 months. And so that's very exciting, because for basically the first 6 months of knowing about the all-in dollars in this whole effort, we thought we might be facing a very significant cliff where, the $18 million would just end. And so as a result of this legislative investment, we no longer are going to see that cliff. And while we don't know the exact amounts, we do know that many of our all-in investments will be able to continue, which is also exciting, not only for the county, who, knows that agencies need quite a bit of time to ramp up and to be able to exercise their practices to really be able to meet their outcomes, but also for the agencies who need to ramp up and certainly don't want to do that to then have to let people go, within 6 months. So very exciting, and thanks to the state legislature for these investments and for helping us to continue this work. I added just a few other investments that you might be interested in, but as a result of all in, not only are we looking at specific programmatic investments, but we're also looking at how can we create a stronger access opportunity for people who are experiencing houselessness and improve the supports that they're receiving overall. And so there are some things that the MAT group is beginning to talk about and plan around, which include focusing on encampments through our outreach teams, just one at a time, to be able to understand, what are the needs of folks in the encampments and how do we help them move on, ideally to permanent housing, but even just to emergency shelter if that's something that they're interested in, so that we can begin to be able to clear out encampments if that's something that those in the encampments are open to doing. Also master leasing initiatives, and so helping agencies understand, what would it look like to rent 5 units from a landlord, and be able to hold that lease and then welcome in their own tenants for whatever period of time they might be served through that program. And master leasing is it's a best practice that's used across the country. We do have agencies that utilize it now. But it is really effective, especially in environments where the vacancy rates are really low. And so it would be in kind of our best interest to see more master leasing occurring. We also are just working on connecting our program providers with our culturally specific and culturally responsive agencies. For example, if there's someone who identifies as non-binary who's utilizing one of our programs, make sure they're well aware of transponder and the different supports that they provide in the community. Making sure that we have very clear entry points for the programs. We know that sometimes it can be difficult for someone to be able to access emergency shelter or rehousing programs, and so we're very much streamlining that. We have an app that is being worked on right now that will help someone who, whether they're living on the street or they're a community member who wants to help, they'll be able to take a look at the app and see what is available in real time now within the participating emergency shelters, which is exciting and to me an important game changer, because we don't want folks to have to waste their time traveling all over town or calling numerous numbers to see if a shelter bed might be available. We're also looking at continuing to build upon a local landlord incentive and mitigation program. We were actually waiting for approval from the state to utilize our funds from that, and we just got it. And so we're really excited and are looking forward to putting that program together and to working with a recent survey that our landlord liaison conducted with landlords to really be able to dig into what landlords shared with us and what is the most effective and desired way for landlords to, be willing to take a risk and work with one of our programs and to make sure that their risks are mitigated should something undesirable happen. And then lastly, looking to provide skills training for our providers and far beyond, recognizing that during COVID, there just wasn't a lot of training happening, and particularly in-person training. And so we have opportunities to be able to do that and a line item within the all-in dollars to be able to offer those trainings. And then because we love our dashboards, we are going to be creating a dashboard to be able to illustrate each agency's progress toward their identified outcomes and our collective progress toward each program type. And of course, we want to make sure that matches the state's dashboard. We hear they're making one too. And so we're hoping we can get ours up first. So we'll go from there. But a lot of system opportunities, and it's fantastic to have such a strong group of community members and elected officials coming together through the multi-agency coordinating group to be able to focus on all these different needs. So if anyone's interested in getting a list of the providers who are receiving all-in funds or just learning more, the county has a website on its web page, or county has a website, and on this web page it specifies all-in information. So feel free to go there, and then there's contact information if you have further questions. Any questions for me?
Well, you have packed a lot of information into so far an hour and 15 minutes, I think. Amazing amount of information. Questions. You're allowing questions as we went along really release the tension of built-up questions. So looking around the board, any questions? Commissioner Lovell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Great information, good stuff. I'm really liking and applauding the landlord incentive thing. That was a very near and dear heart thing to me because we've just been through an experience like that before, and it worked out okay. It was kind of surprising, but it's good to see that we're putting that foot forward. There's a number of questions I have, if you don't mind. There are many from the constituents that have called, and I've kind of had a backlog of questions that I've been saving for this moment. So let me start with the comment. You'd mentioned that, and you've also said that we're looking really good, and we want to be the first to put the website dashboard up, and Yahoo for us, pushing forward. I'm just in my mind, I'm thinking because we're looking to be the banner of the overachievers for the government goals, the governor's goals. I'm wondering if there's some concern out there in the Brown surrounding area if we're going to become so good at homelessness that we're going to attract everybody from all over the country, and we're going to be like the epicenter of that. Is there any concerns about that?
I think that what we see, and one of the reasons that we're collecting the information about, where someone became houseless is to be able to put some data with that assumption that I also hear from community members. What I've seen in other communities that do collect similar data is that folks tend to stay within their community because they know it well, they know what services are available, and they know where to be able to obtain the assistance that they're looking for. And that we tend to not see an enormous increase in the number of people who are houseless, even as a result of growing supports. I'll also share that with this effort, we are, fortunately not the only community that has, a significant amount of dollars that are coming to us. And that, it's not only well spread out throughout Lane County, but we also know Jackson County is receiving dollars, Central Oregon's receiving dollars. And so, just kind of means there's hopefully locales that are meeting the needs of their community members as opposed to people having to move elsewhere in order to have their needs met. I think there's always going to be, a faction of people who are indeed, moving in different places, but not a huge increase in people as a result of new supports.
I'm hoping that data supports that, because the information I get from the emergency response friends that I have, it's totally the opposite of what you're claiming. They're seeing more and more and more. In fact, one guy told me just last weekend he thinks that 90% of the people he's encountered are not from this area. So I would hope that statistic would change. I'm just wondering, you talked about falling off the cliff, and, this looks like we got to get it all spent by January, but yet it looks like the biennium and some of the House bill stuff could extend us beyond 18 months. I mean, in the grand scheme of a decade, this is kind of a blip on the bubble. Where do you see this being a tipping point? Do you think this is going to be a point where we're going to just be about what we can do and that's about it? Or are we always going to be scrapping and looking for dollars to stay abreast of the situation?
So in my experience with this focus area, I think unfortunately it is continually an opportunity to look for dollars. We have dollars through the biennium that we've identified. We know that our most stable funding source right now is HUD Continuum of Care. And beyond that, it really is up to the state and kind of their allocation of dollars related to houselessness, which does change significantly from biennium to biennium.
You'd also gave us some ideas of what people and what households are getting certain money, and just my quick math in my head, there's a number of those blocks where about the average number of monies going to a household was about $2,000, between $1,800 and $2,000. And then you mentioned that there was time to stabilize folks, and in my mind I'm thinking, how far does a couple $1,000s go to help stabilize somebody? Is the typical time frame of someone stabilizing, are we gearing that at about a 2 to a 3 month cycle, and then they stabilize for another 3 or 4 months, and then we're back into that same cycle again? It seems to me like that keeps repeating itself somewhere, and at some point I want to know where we're going to measure our success.
So I think it really depends on the type of program. So when I think about the $2,000 per household, it really is around the prevention assistance, and that focuses on folks who are indeed housed, and that the hope is that if they receive $2,000 to support rent or other needs that they might have, that they'll be able to remain housed. Recognize that there are other households that are going to need far more support than that, and then would need a different type of program. And the challenge with All In is it doesn't necessarily allow for all-encompassing support. So, for example, it wasn't in any way created to support people who have the very highest needs, because these dollars were meant to just serve folks for a short amount of time. And so there are other programs that we have that do support people who have higher needs. Unfortunately, we just don't have enough of them.
Is there, I mean, some of the constituents that ask me, I mean, obviously you were here a number of months ago and your data suggested about 17 to 21% of the people are the people that were really affecting the most, and that there's a good chunk of people who are either they have mental health, they have drug issues, they have issues where they can't respond to a participatory kind of engagement with us. And so I'm just wondering if we're, let's say for round numbers, we have 4,000 homeless people, we consider houseless people in Lane County. At what point do we put the amount of resources in those people we know we can help and let the public safety system and the mental health system take care of the rest? That's kind of how, in my business mind, I'm trying to help figure out, we sound like we're spreading the dollars over a long and wide area. And at some point, I don't see that we're ever going to catch up with this. We're not going to come to a zero-sum game. I think we'd all agree on that. So are we putting the most amount of dollars where they're going to move the needle the most with the most amount of good? That's my concern. And then how do we keep the rest from just violating the environment and the community?
So I think that the greatest pathway that we have as we're looking at the dollars that we have available is, based on what the funds require. And that the majority of the dollars that we have are very much federal funds that do require us to focus on people who have the very highest needs within the community. And so that, coupled with the focus of the Poverty and Homelessness Board, where, really looking at those who also have the highest needs, who are utilizing the highest number of systems of care within the community, to work to support those individuals so that kind of the overall community costs would be reduced, is the focus that we have now. Certainly doesn't mean that, even in 5 years, that would be the continuing focus, particularly of the Poverty and Homelessness Board. But we do have numerous funding sources that do say, focus on those who have the very highest needs. And that's certainly what we have been doing in the past, at least the past 5-10 years.
Great. I know this is kind of an arbitrary question, and I don't expect an answer, but sometimes people come to me and they just say, how much money is it going to take to save the day? I mean, we keep, like we said before, and then we started this conversation, you and I, we're always going to be scrapping for money. We're going to be clawing for money even now into the future. But some people are, in my constituent base, are becoming weary of always being the ones going to work, working hard, trying to make ends meet, buy groceries for their kids, and being burdened with more and more and more expectation to help those who, on the outside, for the most part, appear not to be wanting to help themselves. So I just put that as a thought for this last question that I have. And I just also want to think about us as a county and where we're heading. I would really like to see us take on a mantra or a mission statement that would be maybe different than what we're doing now, and say something to the effect of, if you come to Lane County, you're welcome to be here. But because we have such great people like yourself and people that have put their heads together and figured out what the best impact of the dollars is, we're a recovery county. We're not a county where you come here and take advantage of the community, abuse our services, do whatever we need to do, but we're a recovery county. This is our focus, our mission. We want to help you. This is the most humane thing we can do. And so I think if we could put that forward with these initial funds and this money and start heading in that direction, which I think we're heading there already, but just really make it known in the public, that would be awesome, because you guys are doing a great job. So appreciate you very much. Thanks for fielding my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Laval. Thank you for the answers. Let's move along down the queue to Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I've already, asked and answered most of my questions, but I do just want to reference that Reverend Dan Bryant wrote a wonderful article last week called No Field of Dreams. And it really addresses the attraction theory argument. And he laid out 3 very key issues with the attraction theory, one of which is most folks that are unhoused don't have the resources to move. Not only are they from the community, but they really, for the most part, don't have all the resources that most folks would need in order to continually move. The second item and point he made was every community cannot simultaneously attract people from the other communities really only works in one direction. And that doesn't make sense for this particular theory. But the third one is actually the most important one to me, and really important as a response to that particular argument. And I'm going to quote here just a few sentences in his article. The third problem with the question is just the built-in bias against people without housing. Substitute, quote, people of color, Jews, or LGBTQ for homeless in that question, and you see the problem. Why is bias against people without housing any more acceptable than bias based on race, religion, or sexual orientation? This kind of us-them thinking, which sees the unhoused as the other rather than as part of the community, further stigmatizes the unhoused, adding an additional burden to their already overburdened lives. That was particularly poignant, and I wanted to make sure that that was said today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further questions, comments? Once again, a really good presentation. I think there are a couple of points I'm going to make, that as we look at the folks in our community who are unhoused, we see very visible signs, sometimes as folks camping on the sidewalks, sometimes in very obtrusive places. And quite often it's difficult to ascertain from the evidence that you see, why are people homeless? And, you know, and really that's a question that we try to ask, but we don't always get to that question. And I fear that in fact, I know there's a certain percentage of the people who are homeless who are very predatory in nature, and the victims of their predation are homeless people. That there are people who have masked themselves into the homeless community, who are victimizing the homeless, thereby exacerbating their situation, taking what little that they have and forcing them to remain where they are. And I don't know that we have any statistics on that at this point in time. We don't have a public safety system that supports finding out, investigating how much predation is occurring inside of the homelessness community. Anecdotally, we can see it, and sometimes we do get information as to how people are held down into their homelessness by the little bit that they have being taken from them, because it's very easy to take sometimes. It's not very well protected. They're not very well resourced, and people, I mean, the pilfering is tremendous. I've heard that both anecdotally and the fact that we know that people don't have a place to leave stuff while they're out trying to get a job or trying to make ends meet, we'll say. It's not just get a job, it's they're finding food for their family, whatever it may be. And so, and there's not much that you can do about that sitting right here, but that is something that we need to keep an eye on. How can we help the situation by relieving the predatory nature of some of the people who are in the homeless community, who sometimes you can't tell who they are. You can't distinguish which ones are predating and which ones are the victims, based upon the untrained eye. The second thing that you all cannot do very much about is the fact that we are at a dearth for any form of housing in this community. I can speak personally. My middle son and his family just moved from the Midwest. They sold a house in the Midwest in Ohio, a lovely house, and came here, and the houses are 3 times the price here that they are in the Midwest. There's nothing you can do about it, and there's not much we can do about it on the quick fix basis, but we have to continually be looking at ways that we as a county can work with the cities to make housing more accessible and thereby more affordable. Whether it be any front door we create is going to help alleviate the situation. Not much you can do about it, but the more we talk about it, the more people understand it, and the more when we talk about next week, for instance, we'll be talking about auxiliary dwelling units on county property outside of urban growth boundaries, not on county property, but on properties outside of urban growth boundaries. The little things that we can do to add more housing, thereby not necessarily bringing the cost of housing down, but stopping the incredible escalation in housing costs that we're witnessing. So with that, any last things you all would like to say? And that is including you, Director Gray. You're a part of the panel, so. Ton of information. And not only is it good information that you've given to us, but you've given the gift of more research, so we can actually just sit here and sit for hours. You said you could look for hours at the dashboard. Well, you've made it so that we can sit for hours and look at the dashboard too, Carly. Thank you very much for that.
Yes.
Well, great, a good presentation. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week at the MAC meeting. Is that right, next week?
Yep.
So, very
Thank
good.
you.
Adieu.
Thank you.
You know, when we first started receiving the housing reports, it was kind of sketchy, not sketchy information, but not as coordinated as the presentation that we're seeing now, where we really are getting good information as to how we can really analyze the progress that is being made, or in areas the lack of progress that's being made. So we'll move on down our agenda to item 13, which is the Commissioner's business and announcements. Any announcements? Commissioner Buck.
I have one announcement, which is supposed to be a fun one. Bohemian Mining Days is coming up on Thursday, which is a fun, wonderful fair and parade in Cottage Grove every year. You may have heard on the news that they are struggling with financing. So unfortunately, this year may be their last year unless they can find additional resources. They have a wonderful volunteer crew that puts this all on, and they're very dedicated. I go with my daughter every year. It's a miniature Lane County Fair down there, with booze and rides and a really fun parade. So I would really recommend anybody who has some time come down and join us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. And they used to have the fastest half marathon in existence because it was about a 2,000 drop in elevation from the start of the day. I don't know if they still do that, but people come from all over to run that half marathon because they break the world record every year.
They don't, but they have ore cart races now, which are really fun. And some people do get hurt, so you have to be careful.
Mile 2 and 3 on Butte to Butte.
Mile 2 and 3, mile 1, roll out
Down
mile
that
1
hill
on Butte to
at
Butte.
Fox Hollow.
Moving to the other commissioners, Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to mention this, but since Commissioner Buck said Bohemian Mining Days is like a mini Lane County Fair, the actual maxi Lane County Fair starts, I guess we do have one more meeting before then, starts the day after our next meeting on Wednesday, the 19th, and runs through that Sunday, the 23rd. So hope folks can get out there and enjoy the fair.
Have we heard yet who the talent is this year?
We have heard who the talent is this year. We have. The lineup is, drum roll.
LaneCountyFair.org.
Yeah, Wayne County Fair, at thefair.com, you can go to see all the concert. Lil Jon, Sarah Evans, Quiet Riot, Scotty McCreery, and Sheila E.
A little bit of something for everybody, all right.
A little something for everybody. It is quite the
If you remember Sheila.
assortment pack.
Over 40.
Is that Sheila Easton? No, yeah?
No, that's different.
No, okay. All right, well, I don't remember Sheila E. then.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, great, that's pretty exciting. Any further announcements, Commissioner Senega?
No, not here.
And no announcements on my part, Commissioner Lovell. Then let's move along to future board assignment requests. And I had kind of telegraphed one earlier in the meeting, but any future assignment requests? Commissioner Senega.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a request that we put a pause on the $2,000 a day fines for John Profit. I know he's built a large house, and this project's gone on for decades, and LMD's been over backwards, exhausted every resource they can to try and help him, and they've kind of come to an impasse. Now they're asking him to get those commercial permits, which he doesn't think he can get issued on his rural residential land. I would just like to see a pause on those fines until he has the correct permit and can move forward with his project.
Then can I see how that can be an assignment request? Ms. Mokryski, is that something that you could look into to see what mechanism we could use to pause those fines, or if there is something in place that can immediately turn that spigot off?
I mean, I think that the board, and I'd welcome if county council has any comments, but I think the board could direct staff to do that. I think you would want to, if I were you, I would want to know what the implications of that are. I did forward the board around noon extensive information, so you did receive sort of what I would call a rough timeline from Mr. Profit about his sort of timeline, and then I shared with you the county's record, which includes at least 10 documents from various county officials going back 20 years, as well as fire district officials, about the numerous communications. I believe in my reading of those documents that the notification of the commercial code applying and the need for a fire suppression system goes back at least 10 years. So there's been about 10, and we've worked, so it's certainly, I think, to the board's discretion to be able, if you would like to direct staff to do that, know that there is we believe that the building is being occupied, and that we have followed up because there's been numerous code complaints. So our role at this stage is responding to code compliance concerns. So I think that there are some concerns related to liability that the board would want to consider. But if you would like to direct us, I mean, I think that would be the action that you would take, is to say, to take some action to pause those fines or to provide an additional extension.
Okay, is that something we can do from the dais today, or do you need to prepare something on that?
Chair, if I may, what I would recommend is that if that is the direction that the board will take today, that there be an assignment that those options be presented, as well as a briefing on background and any other liabilities or other concerns that might be of interest to the board, and then the board can make a decision on any kind of future resolution.
Okay, and we have next week's agenda already set as far as the actual agenda. Is that something you could provide perhaps in announcements during, if we gave you the 1 week's lead time on that?
I think so. What I might recommend instead is we look at whether there could be some kind of retroactivity and allow for adequate time for preparation of that memo so that we can be timely as well as provide as much public notice as required.
Okay, so we're down on the 25th, and we'll be back on the, would that be the 2nd of August? So, 1st of August, thank you, 31 days in July. So, Commissioner Buck, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask for some clarification. From all the information that was provided at noon, which I was able to go through, and although it's some of the detail I still need to get through my brain, it seems pretty clear that there have been multiple code violations over the years in a 4-story building on county property, likely illegal renter situation. I think it's a bad precedent for our board to move forward and allow an incident like this not to be fully addressed and not allow code violation fines. What does that say to our community when it comes to building standards that are for public safety, especially knowing there are likely numerous people in this building that may be living in an unsafe situation? I understand trying to work with the individual, and I've worked with many, trying to move through various issues in permitting and compliance. And we do that a lot in the rural sections of our county. In addition to a bad precedent, there is an issue of using this as an example when I think there are very legitimate issues with what's going on in this property, and giving this an exemption from our regular rules while there are other people actually having some real legitimate issues that require and need our attention. We need to really pay attention to what we're deciding to do today. I want to make sure that we create space for the folks that really do have legitimate issues that we can assist with, and not provide exemptions for people who are really ignoring the law for multiple years. And our LMD staff have clearly been working with this individual for a very long time. There is personal responsibility when it comes to maintaining code compliance at your property. I'm not seeing it happening here. And so for that reason, I'm not going to give a head nod.
Yeah, well, I'll just state, I mean, this isn't, he will never get fined. It is adding an extension while he changes his permitting, because right now he's in a residential permit that doesn't allow the fire sprinkler system to be installed the way it was. So now he's going to a commercial permit. He's asked to get a commercial permit that he's not certain they will issue. So I'm saying pause until he has the correct permits, then it will be on him to continue to move forward.
With that, the two sets of information there, Commissioner Buck saying it's bad precedent to move forward with obvious code violations, while other things are legitimate, potentially legitimate issues that we need to deal with. Does that give you enough information to make a presentation in 3 weeks regarding, while in the meantime, placing a hold on the accumulation of fines?
Chair, I don't know that at this moment, there can be a directive, or I can agree certainly on behalf of LMD to place a hold on those fines. What I think would be the most reasonable path forward, if there are adequate head nods for this project, is to prepare a memo with the history of these events, provide the board with choices, whatever choices that are currently allowable under code and manual, as well as state law, and lay out those options for you within that 3-week timeframe. And I think that is a reasonable assignment and can be done.
And one of the options may be to retroactively forgive fines. Is that, did I hear you
If
say that?
permissible, or some kind of a waiver, I'd have to research that, Chair, to be certain that that's an option, but, yeah.
Commissioner Senega, does that take it in the right direction for you?
I would like to see the fines paused until we have a resolution between us and Mr. Profit.
Then do we know, is there a mechanism that we can pause the fines? At this moment forward, the fines have already accumulated until we get the presentation.
They don't start until tomorrow.
They don't start until tomorrow.
Yeah.
Got it.
Well, we're kind of working on this on the fly. I guess I would speculate that the board could do that. I think you'd want to be a little bit more clear than, pausing until we've reached agreement, because we have 20 years of record of disagreement.
Well, let's pause until we have, until we have a presentation.
So could we pause the fines until, let's say the presentation is 3 weeks from today, and they're due to begin accumulating tomorrow, just put a hold on the fines accumulation?
If that's you can make that, what I would suggest is you provide that like in a direction, and maybe, I don't know if you think they need a vote on that. But then also, if you can be clear about what you want us to bring back in 3 weeks. So what is the memo, and what are the, I guess, what do you want us to bring back to you in 3 weeks?
And I will say that I'm not in favor of giving somebody a free ride if there is a willful violation of county code, ongoing, knowing willful violation. But I don't know that that's the case, and that's something that maybe we could flesh out in a presentation in 3 weeks. Is this a willful violation ongoing? And is that something that really is egregious that needs to be addressed? Vice Chair Trieger?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not in support of waiving fines based on the history, that past performance predicts future behavior. What the best information we have to go on is that staff has tried to work with this gentleman on numerous occasions on numerous issues. And I have great concern, as Commissioner Buck raised, about the precedent that this was set for the many other people that are working with land management and cooperating and staying within the parameters and complying. And so I really appreciate County Council coming up with a potential for retroactively or refunding, should that be the will at a later date, but to disrupt a process that is clearly in place with someone who has shown over and over again for more than a decade an unwillingness to work within the parameters gives me great pause. I don't think it's fair, and I'm not in support.
So the fines begin accumulating tomorrow. Is there anything that Mr. Prophet can do to stop the fines from accumulating starting tomorrow? Is there, do we know that there's an action that he can take today that's going to stop the fine from happening tomorrow? Or is that just in the pipeline?
Chair, if I may, there are other remedies available to Mr. Prophet, which could include a challenge in circuit court. And so, you know, there are other avenues for relief for Mr. Prophet. And certainly with respect to waiver or sort of forgiveness of fines from today's date forward, again, happy to brief that for the board for discussion.
Okay. Is there a hardship placed on the county if we just put a hold on the fines until after we've received a presentation in, let's say, 3 weeks, so that there aren't 3 weeks of fine accumulation?
To be candid, Chair, I just am not sure what our authority is to do that at this very moment in time, and the appropriativeness that under the code and the manual. I just don't know.
Then I am at an impasse here. I don't know how to move forward with this. You're saying that we cannot put a hold on the fines, so the fines will start accumulating, and we can't really take any board action for 3 weeks, so we have 21 days of $2,000 a day. Let's see.
Chair, and I'm not sure that we're saying you can't do that. We're saying if you want to pause the meeting and give us some time to review that, we can do it, but we haven't had any time to consider that request, so we're happy to look into that and give the board options or recommendations.
You haven't had any time to consider this?
The request to pause the fines?
Yeah, as we talked about it at noon today, Mr. Mokrahysky.
Well, let's put a hold on the conversation for a second, Ms. Mokrahysky. And what you're suggesting is that we maybe go into a recess for a short period to consider what the option may be? Or the other option is to let the fines accumulate and potentially retroactively forgive them should we find a way to make that happen. So, but that's kind of a speculative proposal, that the forgiving the fines, because we don't know, I don't know, if we're going to find a way to satisfy Mr. Prophet's claims that he's done everything that he could possibly do to avoid the fines.
Yeah, I mean, he'll be the first to admit that this project got way bigger than he expected, as he's been doing it on his own, trying to work his way through it.
Well, let's,
So, yeah, I'm happy to. Commissioner Sanaga texted me at 1 o'clock. The meeting started at 1:30, so I've been in the meeting since then, and we can certainly, if you'd like to take a break, get together with county council and land management and our job is to provide you with the best options and recommendations based on what you would like to do. And so that's what I think we're asking to do, given the limited time that we've had to consider the request.
okay. This is, in my experience, unprecedented. However, precedents are set every single day on things. So, Commissioner Trieger, go ahead.
Well, I guess you were saying we were at impasse, but like any assignment, we ask for head nods. If it receives 3, it advances. So I'm not clear if we're still asking for head nods, what it is we're being asked to nod our heads. I'm not sure that's an impasse. It's an assignment request. The initial one was one that was being made that we're not sure we are sort of legally allowed to fulfill. So I hear staff working really hard to try to work with the commissioner making the assignment to craft an assignment that is workable. But I don't feel it's an impasse. I feel like staff is making an effort, and I don't appreciate us.
Well, let's not get into what we each appreciate, don't appreciate. We're trying to move forward with some business right now. So I'm going to suggest that we do take a 15-minute.
Interruption is also not appreciated.
Agreed.
I was given the floor. I hadn't completed my turn speaking.
Very well, as you wish.
So I don't appreciate what is essentially a culture of bullying that is what I'm seeing happen here. It's not how we do business. It's not fair. It's not fair to people who have been following the rules, to have someone who has been flaunting the rules for more than a decade to ask for such an exception. And I don't appreciate staff being treated as if they're not working their hardest and their best in the best interest of this organization and to protect this organization and work within the parameters of the law. Thank you.
Let's choose kindness, shall we, from this moment forward. So, Mr. Murkowski, if we were to give you 15 minutes at this point in time, if you've got 3 head nods for 15 minutes, could you come back with a recommendation or a suggestion? That suggestion may be there is no option for us.
We'll do our best.
That is all we can ever ask you to do, Mr. Murkowski, and that is all I've ever witnessed you actually doing is your best. So thank you for that. I do have a second assignment request, which I could put forward at this point in time before a 15-minute recess. Should we have 3, I think we have 3 head nods for a 15-minute recess, Ms. Murkowski. The second one is regarding the Planktown hearings official decision. And my request is that the Board of Commissioners review the hearings official decision for the denial decision on the Planktown, which is a PA 22-05528. And as I'd mentioned earlier in the day, the Board of Commissioners routinely in the past has reviewed hearings officials' decisions and made, sometimes overturned them, sometimes, most often not. But in this case, what I'd ask is that we do have a review of that hearings official request and potentially use that as an opportunity to decide whether or not the Board of Commissioners should, on a routine basis, consider reviewing of hearings officials' analysis. Did I make that clear, Steve?
I think so. So you want to just help me understand, you want a work session to discuss that?
It would be, initially, it would be a review of PA 22-05528, which is the hearings official's decision on that. And
That specific case.
That specific case. And we'll use that as an opportunity to talk about future board review of hearings officials' decisions.
Okay.
Okay. All right. That's clear. Then without...
I just want to make sure there's head nods. That was a request for assignment.
Do we have head nods on that?
Chair, I understand we have Amber Bell and Keir Miller on the line. I don't know if we need a little more information or support procedurally about...
How'd you know that?
I saw Keir's name flash up when we left the last item, and so I texted Ms. Jones to confirm that he was in fact tuned in.
Okay. Well, I should be more attuned. So, Keir Miller, are you on the line right now? Do you want to weigh in on this?
I am, Chair Farr. Thank you, and good afternoon. I'd be happy to weigh in on this issue as well as the talk with County Counsel and Steve regarding the previous item. I have some thoughts on that and potential solutions. I have concerns about the request to hear, to have this issue brought before the board just on some procedural grounds. Mr. Basaraba and his attorney have filed for reconsideration with the county hearings officials decision, which is, technically that is the way it's laid out in code right now. That is the correct procedure to go through. At the end of that reconsideration process from the hearings official, depending on what the decision is, the applicant would have another opportunity to request that the board take this item up. The planning director would have an opportunity to elevate this to the board if that's the direction you give us, but just bringing it back to the board right now procedurally kind of cuts out an important piece. There really does need to be a discussion about the elect to hear process, because this was a very well discussed and thought out change in code about 4 years ago that the board unanimously approved. There are a lot of disadvantages to bringing these items to the board for the general public. And traditionally, the board almost very rarely elected to actually hear a decision that was ruled on by the hearings official. There are costs involved. There are significant staff and board resources that are involved. We hear about 30 appeals a year. Under the old process, all of those appeals would come to the board as an elect to hear, and that would require staff time, board time, county council's time, it would extend the timelines to issue a final county decision on average of 4 to 5 weeks. There's a cost involved. And then, of course, all of this additional time that staff is spending bringing these issues to the board to explain the nuances of the legal arguments that played out before the hearing's official. The board would then probably dismiss the majority of those and not hear them. In all that time, those specific staff could be issuing land use decisions and improving timelines, which is a board concern as well. So while I understand the concerns of Mr. Basaraba, staff reviewed the criteria of his case with legal counsel and made the determination there's criteria that we look at whether or not an issue does need to be elevated to the board. These were criteria the board decided upon. Is it of countywide significance? Does it reoccur with frequency? Does it involve a Goal 5 resource? All of these issues staff reviewed. I would say that the current process right now is that the planning director sees the applications that come in and can determine whether or not those meet those criteria. And then the option is for them to elevate it to the board. It's not for the applicant's attorney to lobby the board to hear these cases. While I understand that makes sense because I think they might have a better audience in front of the board, at the end of the day, the board still needs to make findings whether to approve or deny these applications based on the legal ramifications, which if they're not supported by law, will just be appealed to LUBA anyways. So there's several concerns there. And I really think it's a matter of trust, of whether or not the public trusts staff to elevate issues to the board that meet those criteria. And I think there's a narrative currently that staff is bent on denying applications. And Mr. Basaraba said that today, that he feels staff just are hell-bent on denying his application, but the data really suggests otherwise. I mean, I'll just mention that LMD processes about 1,000 land use permits a year. About 300 of those are the type 2 land use decisions like this one that has been the subject of this conversation. Of that, we approve 85 to 90% of the applications. Of those that are approved or denied, we get about 30 appeals a year. I have data going back a year, and it shows that land management has been affirmed on all of the decisions we have denied at either the hearings official or LUBA, or the decision is pending, or the application has been withdrawn. So what that shows is that staff is very careful on which applications they approve and deny, and that when we issue those decisions, the vast majority of time, they're upheld in a legal court. So again, I think there's a broader discussion that needs to occur. I would welcome a work session on this, but I have concerns about the immediate direction to elevate this to the board. I don't believe it's possible under the code, but I would defer to legal counsel on that. Thanks.
So let me reiterate what you said, that you approved 85% to 90% of all applications, leaving 10 to 15% that you don't approve. And you initially said 100% of the appeals were upheld, then you revised that to say virtually or nearly all of the appeals are upheld. Did I hear you correct on both of those?
The data I have going back for the last year shows that we have 29 appeals. Of the decisions that have been issued, because not all decisions have been issued yet, some are pending and some are withdrawn by the applicant. Of all those decisions I have before me, we were affirmed on all of those decisions. I understand that this table was current up until the end of the fiscal year, and there have been some decisions that have come in after that. I'm not sure of the disposition of all those decisions. I think there were 2. One of those, I believe, was a denial of our reversal of our decision, but I want to make it clear that that wasn't a reversal based on the facts of the case. That was a decision that we advised the applicant when they made the application that they didn't give us the information we needed to approve it. Because again, staff denies applications when we're required to by law, not when we want to, not when we think it's, we only deny when we don't have before us what we can issue an approval with. In that case, we didn't have the correct information and the applicant supplemented the record during the hearing. So had they just provided us the information we asked for initially, it could have been an approval. So I don't really view that as a reversal of staff's decision. We could have gotten there initially had they cooperated. So yeah, my statement, I stand by it. We've been affirmed on all of the decisions I had before me that have been decided.
Well, thank you, Keir, for that additional information. Based upon the information you've given me, I'm going to step back from my request at this point, Mr. Mokrahysky, but I may bring that back next week after I research a little bit further what Mr. Mills just said. And I have no reason to distrust the words that you say, and I'm not suggesting that the 85 to 90% is inaccurate or the 100% or almost all that you state is inaccurate. So based upon that, Mr. Mokrahysky, I'll withdraw that request. And at this point in time, I'll look around to see if we're in approval of a 15-minute recess. We'll return here, if that's the case, at, I have a glare on that clock, so at 5 minutes till 4. Let's make it to 4 o'clock even. Any objections to a recess until 4 p.m.? We are recessed. Board of County Commissioners meeting, and Mr. Mulcahy, you have some information for us regarding Commissioner Senega's request for action.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners, for giving us a few minutes to work through that issue. So in a minute, I'll turn it over to Mr. Miller, our Land Management Division Manager, to walk through the process and the options available in this situation. I just wanted to note that, and I shared earlier that we shared with commissioners in response to public comment this morning. I shared the record of several different, I counted about 10 different documents going back about 20 years. And so I just want to call again to our attention that, and Mr. Miller talked about in the based on the hearings official request and the public comment there, provided you with data around the number of applications that we process, the number of those that go to appeal and that are, ultimately resolved. And in code enforcement cases, we are, as the board knows, we're a complaint-driven code enforcement operation. So we respond to complaints that are submitted to us. And we always work with individuals and property owners to get those issues resolved. That's what we want, is resolution to those concerns. In this case, again, we have a 20-year record of an individual and a lot of challenges and back and forth from various officials in the county and fire districts and others to seek to rectify those concerns. In the last 10 years, there's been at least 10 years of notice to this individual that they need a commercial building permit for this property, 10 years. So they've had 10 years to submit for a commercial building permit application. There's been multiple communication. I won't go through all the record in the last 10 years, but approximately a year ago, the individual was notified again by our code enforcement office that they needed to submit for a commercial building permit. Again, in January of this year, 6 months ago, they were notified and given an additional 6-month extension. So they've had another full year to submit that commercial building permit. And there's been, to my knowledge, at least in the review of the record, no effort to do that. So this is always these types of things when we have to regulate. There's state laws and codes and local codes and rules that we have to follow. We have to enforce those, but we always want to be reasonable in our enforcement of those. And if an applicant or an individual that needs to get into compliance on an issue demonstrates their willingness through action to do that, we always try to work in collaboration. So one of the challenges here is we have not seen those steps over 2 decades, and then over the last decade, and over the last year. So I just want to provide that as sort of the overall concern, because that hasn't been really reflected when you hear the public comments and you see some of the record. Not all of that has been surfaced. So with that, what we took the break to do was sit and talk about the issues and the process and the options available to do whatever we can do within this circumstance that is reasonable and appropriate to help to positively move the issue forward. So I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Miller and just ask him to walk through that discussion that we had.
Sure. Thanks, Steve, and thanks for that background. Just to reiterate, we routinely work with folks on, in an effort to gain compliance. We do not try to be punitive. We view success when we can get folks to come into compliance without ever having to start the compliance effort. Just initial conversation, talking with them, getting them to come into compliance. If folks don't do that, there is a process set out in code. And just to kind of clarify where we're at in this process, we've issued an order to comply to this individual, to Mr. Profit, which has been, we have extended, as Steve mentioned, we issued this order to comply in July of 2022. Provided an additional extension to him via email, giving him a deadline of tomorrow to, resolve his issues, get the commercial sprinkler system in place. based on, our discussions with him, his testimony at the board this morning, it appears that his intent is that he would like to just have an extension to his existing residential permit, which actually is not the correct permit type anymore because he's done so many modifications to the building over the years that it falls outside of that residential permit. So he really does need to bring this into compliance with a commercial building permit. Fines don't actually start tomorrow. The next step in the process would be for us to issue what's called a notice of failure to comply, where we would go document that, steps haven't been taken. In this case, it'd be easy. We just see that he hasn't submitted for the permitting yet, and we would issue that letter. He then has 10 days to appeal. Fines begin accruing once he receives that letter, but he has 10 days to appeal that. As soon as an appeal is received, the fines go on hold. So if he receives the letter on, Wednesday of next week, and then on Thursday he submits, an appeal statement, fines would be set at that one day. I'll also point out that the $2,000 fines that are mentioned in the order to comply, that is just our basic template letter language. And what that says is up to $2,000 a day. That's the max amount that we would ever impose. There's actually a matrix in the code that spells out exactly what the fees are. So it's likely that the fees wouldn't be that maximum amount. That's usually when there's repeated offenses and commercial gain. And he probably does check some of those, but probably not all of them. We would have to do that calculation. But I guess the bottom line is fees don't actually start until that second letter is initiated. So that is one option that we could send the letter. He can appeal that if he believes he has a legitimate reason to do so. He can work through the appeals process. The other thing I'll mention is, again, with individuals who are making legitimate progress towards achieving compliance, we routinely grant them additional extensions. To date, Mr. Profit hasn't shown a willingness to make those sort of concessions and to agree to bring this, his project into compliance. If he were willing to do that, I'm more than willing to establish a timeline with him that he would agree to. I think it's reasonable to say if you submitted a commercial building permit within 30 days and he agrees to this in writing, we could hold off on issuing that notice of failure to comply letter. He would have 30 days then to come in and submit for his commercial building permit. It wouldn't need to be a complete permit. For example, if he's having issues with engineering for his fire sprinkler system, we do allow some additional time once the permit's been submitted to follow up with those additional engineering details. That's fairly routine. But we would want to see, legitimate good faith effort on his part to follow through on that building permit. And that's ultimately what we want. We want to see the building safe. We want to see any tenants in there protected. And so that would be another option available that we could pursue. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'll throw it open for questions. Commissioner Senega?
No, that was very clear here. I appreciate it. Those are two very viable options.
Okay, excellent.
A question?
Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Kier, I believe the document you're referring to, I opened up and looked at, was dated May 4th, 2022, with the up to $2,000 daily fine. And that order to comply said he had until June 3rd of 2022 to fulfill several things. So are you saying he did not fulfill those and yet also was not levied fines? Is that right? It's the PDF 509-ZA22-00016.
Thank you, Vice Chair Trieger. You are correct. I'm sorry, I had that date incorrect. That is the compliance action order to comply, CA 22-00016. He was given until June 3rd, 2022. And yes, you're correct. He did not comply at that time, and we did not pursue fines at that time. The compliance officer working on this case is in here that I could specifically talk with, but I do see that there's some correspondence email between her and Mr. Prophet in January that suggests that she was granting him additional extensions. And there was the one provided, which I do have record of in January, which provided the extension until July 12th of this year. And correct, no fines have been levied at this point.
No fines, but also no steps towards compliance on the part of Mr. Prophet.
Correct.
And my last question is, do we know there are people now living in what is potentially an unsafe and certainly an unpermitted structure?
That is our understanding. We received some information from who I believe is a former tenant that indicated that multiple of the units in this, what's essentially been divided out into apartments, are occupied. That was accompanied by some photos and short video footage showing that clearly the interior of the structure had exposed wiring, code violations, other concerns like that. So that's our understanding.
And no fire suppression system?
Yeah, at this time, they do not have the correct fire suppression system in place.
He does have a fire suppression system, just not the correct one.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, then what action shall we take from here? What do you suggest, Ms.
Well, I think what we've shared with you is the action that we're planning on taking with this issue, and so you've heard from Mr. Miller what the next steps will be. So there should be outreach, I believe, if not today, likely tomorrow, with Mr. Prophet on those two scenarios.
Ms. Miller, thank you very much for working overtime to make this, to help us to get to this conclusion today. Ms. Morgreisky, Ms. Pettigrew, thank you for your assistance to get us to this point. Commissioner Seneca, does this satisfy your request?
Absolutely.
It does. Very good. With that, then, I have, as I stated, withdrawn my request for a hearings official review at this point. I'm going to put that on hold for a moment or two until I get a little bit more information. Mr. Miller, thank you for that information, that new information that you provided to me today. With that, is there any further business for the Board of County Commissioners? Ms. Morgreisky, do you? Yes.
I apologize. I was just going to ask you to do a quick review of assignments if there are any.
Thank you. Then, Commissioner Lovell, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I want to stop the bleeding, but I have one more, if I could. You know, in light of all of this public testimony and the break we've had and the volatility of the afternoon, I think for me, this is all about due process. And I think when people come to the end of the road, when they have an appeal and they've gotten through challenges and they say, hey, I want to appeal to the board, it's almost like saying I want to appeal to Caesar and figure out what he says, and what he says is law. So if this is about due process, so perhaps I'd like to suggest perhaps a work order that if we could ask staff to put forth maybe a test balloon directive to the hearings official, bringing forth to us maybe 5 cases that the people are asking, of our constituents that are asking for some hearings from the Board of County Commissioners, and just do a test balloon case of a handful of cases and see where it goes. I mean, obviously this is going to take some staff time and some money, but I think this is all part of being fair to our constituents with the due process idea that I suggested when I started this conversation. So I'd like to ask staff to put forth a test balloon directive to the hearings official, requesting about 5 to 10 cases where constituents' appeals stop short of the Board of Commissioners weigh-in, or to those who feel they're not fully getting a chance to appeal their LMD decisions past the director as our charter allows.
Commissioner Lovell, that seems a little bit of an adjunct to the request that I made earlier, which I put on hold in order to get a little bit more information. Can I ask you to put that request on hold until I've done a little bit of the research that I plan to do?
Okay.
Which is along the exact same lines, and then this is something potentially we could bring back a little bit more digested for next week.
Right. I just want to keep the conversation alive. Thank you. Yeah, I can do that.
Very well. Okay. Any further issues from the items from the board? Then Ms. Morgreisky, can you give us a review of assignments?
I don't have any. Did I miss anything?
I don't think you did.
Yeah.
I think that's the right answer.
All right. Any new,
Very good.
any new assignments?
Very good. Then, without any further business for this Board of County Commissioners, thank you everyone for your indulgence and your extra work today. We are adjourned.